Hello and welcome. This is the first of our 2023 events. I mean, it's only 24th of Jan, so it's okay. We're getting started for this new year. It is also the very first time that we run a hybrid event. People in the room and remote, so technically, hopefully everything should be okay. Should being the key word. So please bear with us for this first attempt. So welcome to everyone. We are actually very excited to be running this session. It's been, admittedly 3-4 months in the making, and if everything goes well, it should be the start of a series of workshops that we intend to run on a regular basis, with obviously topics changing from one to the other based on the community's feedback and everyone's attended. So we, towards the end of today, we'd love to hear what you think about how it went, and more importantly, if there's things that we didn't talk about, please tell us about it so we can put it in our kind of backlog, so that we can integrate it in future sessions. So really today, we want it to be a collaborative event. So we've got a lot of stuff to show you, especially the guys next to me. But please bear in mind that it is meant to be a very interactive event. So there are topical things that we want to show you and demonstrate. At any point in time, please don't wait for the end. Questions, whatever it may be, or if you feel you want to see a bit more of what you've been shown, well, in the room, just speak out, or if you guys are online, raise your hand, and obviously we'd love to hear from you as to what you would like to know.
I'll moderate any questions for anyone online. That's me, Ash. So feel free to drop any questions in at the right time.
Okay. So let's just go. So that's the welcome done. And today, first of all, we're going to thank our friends from Nintex that joined us and be part of this session. So we have Magic John with us. Thank you, John. And towards the end over there, we've got Strategic James. Thank you for joining us. And closer to me, we've got the amazing Amanda, who's, if you know her, is the mastermind behind, our beautiful business that is AMO Consultancy. So what we really wanted to showcase today is a number of things, and it's more or less ways to make your lives easier, to make the tools that you're already using even more powerful than what they are out of the box. So we really want to take the technology that you're using to the next level. Okay, so it's about giving you tips, giving you anything we can give you from our own experience, so that you guys can deliver quicker, bigger, and better. Okay, and the way we've structured today's session is effectively going all the way from the top to all the way down, really in depth. Technically, what's going on under the hood. Okay, so James is going to start by talking about Nintex in general. Obviously, most of you would be seasoned K2 people. You would know about it, but we know now that Nintex is not just K2. There's a lot more to it. So we'll tell you a bit about that. Then we're diving into a quick update on the K2, what's happened so far, and what is the roadmap, what is it looking like for the future. And then we're going to dive into the topic of the day, which is frameworks, right? This is what brings us all together around the room today. And so we're going to talk about frameworks, but more specifically what it means for the Nintex K2 technology. How can we implement it? What can we really get out of this principle? At that point, it's quite likely we'll have a quick comfort break, and then when we come back, we're going to get into the action. So John will show us some really cool stuff about what that framework looks like and what we can do really live.
And then Amanda will also tell us more about at AMO how we approach this framework and how we try and implement it in different fashions based on our customers' context. Okay, so we're going to have some real business examples to show you today. So if that's all right, we'll get going. And James, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Bertrand. So, good afternoon, everyone. So, a quick introduction to myself. So, as you saw, my title is very grandiose, a strategic partner manager at Nintex. Essentially, what I do is I look after a number of partners that leverage Nintex technology across Europe. And I've been with Nintex for just over a year. And AMO, one of my premier partners across the region. So, since joining Nintex, I've been really impressed with some of the work that you guys have done on top of primarily the K2 platforms. It's great that we're here today where you can showcase some of that work, and hopefully you can learn some really cool stuff from what these guys have been doing across their customers. So I'm going to give you a quick summary, high level of Nintex, and we're going to talk more specifically around K2 and what's happened really since the acquisition of K2 by Nintex, which was just over 2 years ago. Look at some of the things that we've done, and more importantly, I suppose, what's coming in the future, new capabilities within the Nintex K2 stack. So let's start off with kind of what Nintex do. So everyone loves the mission statement. So it's really kind of improving the way people work through process intelligence and automation. So what does that mean? It's really about giving our customers the tools that they need to do more with less, essentially. How can we make more efficiency across the business and give you the tools to build automation into all aspects of a business. If you get to the next slide, Bertrand. So let's start with a quick history lesson and give you a bit of background on kind of where we've come from, which you may not know. So Nintex was formed back in 2006, and for the first 6 years of existence, we're really focused on the Microsoft stack, and in particular to Microsoft SharePoint. So Nintex built an add-on essentially for SharePoint that helped organizations build workflows within the SharePoint platform. Simply because the tools out of the box of Microsoft didn't really scale to enterprise level. They do very basic rudimentary workflow, but if you want to build anything with any level of complexity, then what Microsoft offered out of the box didn't really help. So Nintex and the Nintex workflow solution really helped to thousands of customers in that particular ecosystem. So we're very successful in that particular market, acquired thousands of customers in that particular space. But then around about 10 years ago, kind of Nintex pivoted slightly after some investment. And actually the vision was to grow from simply a Microsoft SharePoint workflow provider into a true automation vendor. So over the subsequent 10 years, as you can see, we've gone through a number of acquisitions. I think we're at around about 8 now, to build out a platform of automation technology that complements what we had for workflow. The first of those being what's called Draw Loop, but now called the document generation for Salesforce. So this is focused on the Salesforce ecosystem, but again ties into that automation. A lot of automation use cases will require, say, a document to be delivered to generators, so we can actually utilize data that sits inside Salesforce and bring that into a use case. Subsequent acquisitions include ProMap. So this is all about process mapping, now called Nintex Process Manager. So this is helping customers to really understand how their business operates, how do employees do their job, how do processes really work across the various parts of a business. It helps you to document and map those processes that you can then share across the business. Then I suppose most important for you guys is the acquisition of K2 Software, which just over 2 years ago. That really kind of extended the workflow capabilities that Nintex had into, I'd say, more business process management, more complex use cases. And that's really how we distinguish Nintex and what was K2. So there's always a lot of questions about that. I think I was in the SharePoint space for many years, and saw Nintex and K2 really competing for the same business, the same market. But actually, when you look at that, they really are two different offerings. Nintex history really is that simple, easy to build workflow, whereas K2 is for more complex business applications that may be integrating with other technologies, more an orchestration of process across whether it's a HR system, an Oracle system, SAP, whatever technologies are in place within a business. K2 allows you to kind of bring all that together and build process across them. But we didn't stop there. So in the last couple of years, two further acquisitions, one for digital signature, which is AssureSign, and now Nintex Sign. So this again really ties well with the document generation capabilities. The document needs to be generated. Quite often we need a signature to go with that. So now we have the capability to e-sign across those processes. And our most recent acquisition was in the RPA space. So we acquired a company called Cryon around about a year ago now. So just relaunched that as Nintex RPA. So now we're able to kind of tie in RPA bots into workflow processes. So as you can see, Nintex has been very acquisitive over the years. That's going to continue. So you will see further acquisitions, more complementary technologies that are going to be brought into the platform over the coming months and years. Can I go to the next slide, Bertrand? So high level, this is the platform as it stands today. Really they fall into three categories: discovery, automation, and optimization. And you'll see underneath that, really what we're trying to do is kind of combine those solutions into a true platform. Yes, it takes time when you acquire technology and acquire a business. There's a lot of work that needs to go in to actually bring that into the platform in a true platform sense rather than distinct solutions. But really our goal and our vision is really to have kind of that shared platform approach where we're able to kind of integrate solutions and technologies across all the three components that you see here. So from a discovery perspective, this is quite often how we'll start in an engagement with a customer. It's really helping them to understand their processes today. There's two solutions as part of that. One is around process discovery. So this is really, think of it as auto discovery of how people do their job. So we have really clever technology that will actually look to see how a user is doing a process. Maybe it's someone in finance. How do they process an order? How do they go through the accounts receivable process? What systems, interactions do they have with the different technologies? So using our capabilities, we can auto map that and hopefully spot areas for improvement around that particular process. To complement that, we have process management. So this is the acquisition of ProMap that I mentioned. So this, in a similar theme, is really about mapping and documenting their process. But this gives users or employees within a business a view of that. So think of it as a process catalog where you can actually see how to do your job. So it's really great from an onboarding perspective. So when an employee joins a company, what they did in their previous role may not be the same as they're doing in their new company. So we can actually document and share those processes across the business so everyone knows how to do that particular task. And both of those solutions really help to identify areas for automation that brings us onto that middle section, which is really about the tools to automate, which K2 is a part of, around that orchestrate part. We've obviously got the Nintex workflow for the more simple use cases, but really K2 is where we're getting into more complex scenarios. RPA, again, we can now tie that into workflow processes through Nintex RPA, and the document generation and e-signature, as we mentioned, really tie in well to a lot of processes that you see inside a business. The third area is around optimization. So once you've built a process, once you've automated, what we want to do is see how that is going and spot for areas of improvement. Look to see what are the bottlenecks, maybe what are the other areas that we can change within the process to further enhance that use case. So with about 8 solutions in the platform, we can hopefully help in all aspects. Next slide. So that brings us on to a Nintex K2 roadmap. So I think the first thing to say is that we've actually rebranded Nintex K2. So although this is a K2 workshop, we are now no longer K2, although it's going to take some time for everyone, I think, to really get rid of the name. But we are now Nintex Automation On-Premises, which really slips off the tongue. But obviously this was announced 2-3 months ago, and it's going to take some time, I think, before we kind of remove all aspects of K2 from documentation and so on and so on. But certainly what we're trying to do with that announcement is kind of bring all those different technologies under the same hood and the same branding, and hopefully from a customer and a partner's perspective, it helps to solidify that platform approach. Now in terms of kind of where we've been spending time on the Nintex Automation On-Prem platform, a lot of that is around modernisation, and a lot of work has gone in really under the hood. Speaking to partners and customers, sometimes it does appear that maybe not a whole load of features have been brought on board over K2 in the last 12 months, but under the hood we've been spending a lot of time and energy and investment in making sure that the actual stack itself is utilising kind of modern practices, modern frameworks, making it kind of really future-proof for the many years ahead. And I think the enterprise security and application features on a similar theme, a lot of work involved in that maybe don't come to visibly like new capabilities and new features within the platform. Another area that we are spending a lot of time on is integration with the other technologies in the stack. So you will start to see more and more integration points with the other components of the Nintex platform. Next slide, Rachel. So in terms of kind of the release timeline, this is actually more of a rear view mirror than a roadmap. So actually looking kind of where we've come from over the last 12 months. So we actually have 5.7 now, is that correct, John?
On the way to
5.7 on the way, yeah. So this is due early this year. Typically kind of 2 releases per year. Also what we're doing is, although Nintex K2 is primarily on-prem focused, we do obviously have K2 Cloud still, and we're still developing that, but combining the kind of the releases of those. And we are committing to, I think, a minimum of 5 years now for K2 Cloud. Yes. So that isn't going away. We are kind of committed to developing that and supporting that longer term. Yeah, I think what you'll see over, if you want to move to the next slide, Bertrand, over the coming months, you'll start to see more capabilities announced around these particular areas. I'm not going to read through this particular slide, and John, if there's anything you want to highlight in particular around kind of the future stuff that we've got coming that maybe of interest?
We're going to see some things on style profiling and discuss about the enhancements that will go through in 2023. But my personal favorite is the modern controls. We will change how the look and feel and applications of K2 to a more modern way around mobiles and all that stuff.
I think it's worth mentioning that since the last release of 5.6, which was over this summer, and the integration stack is already available. So we now we can use the sign module straight from K2. So the Nintex sign methodology for your documents is readily available in the latest version. And the next two to come in terms of integration are the DocGen and
Quiet.
Yes, exactly.
And one last point is that you see that the last one, the future, the accelerated automation, includes capabilities for BPMN, which is something that the K2 space been discussed for a long time. I think it's safe to say that we're targeting BPMN for the whole of the Nintex platform, K2 being one of them. So again, I think that's going to be very interesting.
Yes. Some of the other integrations that we've seen already between the other products, in the Nintex toolbox, is integration between the Pro Map tool, which is the mapping process mapping component that we talked about earlier, and Nintex Workflow Cloud. So in a matter of a click, because that's literally what it is, if you have then documented your process in just a written about it, then the engine will transform this written process into a workflow skeleton in Nintex Workflow Cloud. So it doesn't develop the app for you. It's not that good. But in terms of again of acceleration, in terms of time to market, we again one step further in terms of accelerating the delivery of these automation apps.
If I may, we're going to see a bit of how Program integrates with K2 in what I'm going to show, but I think me coming from a K2 background, one of the discussion points of K2 was that we could integrate with a lot of systems, but sometimes it was a burden to buy the system from here, integrate with a third-party one. I think the value now under the Nintex platform is that we can provide most of the requirements that our customers had around third-party integrations, like document generation. I think back in the day we used DocuSign for signatures, for example. So now coming into a single vendor, I think that has a lot of value in the strength of K2, which is traditionally integrating with external systems. Yeah.
Thanks, James. Before we jump into the next topic, was there any questions around the roadmap, the products, anything and everything so far? Online?
I mean, just from me, the upgrade, as far as upgrading current platform, would that be fairly seamless?
Yes. So it's still the case. So today, if you already are on K2, so K2 Five, I'm going to call it the old way, right? So that we're not confusing anyone. From one version to the other, it's pretty seamless. The major reshuffle was between version 4 and version 5. That was a major upgrade simply because in between they've literally rewritten the whole of the workflow engine. So there was clearly a bit of work to be done, but as we've now migrated certainly, I was most person, all of our customers now, it's really straightforward. So and also now that we're on version 6, right, 5.6 of that major version 5, the stability is unparalleled. So jumping from one minor to the other, it does not introduce any issues at all. It's really, really stable and straightforward.
To that point, in the roadmap you saw a lot about modernization and stability, right? So basically what we're doing is we're focusing on making sure that from this point onwards, it's even way more aligned with industry standards, but it's also way more transparent for exactly that point. Migrating, no longer issues. We just got rid of any Silverlight remnants, for example, in the platform. So you're going to see these things flowing in K2 along with everything, any new features we brought in. But I think there's a massive focus this year on just making sure that we're up to speed with where the industry is and how things are expected to work nowadays.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump quickly into some theoretical stuff and things that we all probably know of, but I think it's the introduction to what those two guys are going to talk about in a moment. So what we know about our lovely low-code platforms, namely Nintex K2, is that there are some great advantages to have them. Primarily, the top one is rapid time to market, right? It's like how quickly can we deliver a new application from literally getting the requirements all the way to prod, that time to market, is unparalleled in terms of the technology enabling us to go that fast. It's also really easy to grasp, really easy to handle. We don't necessarily need days and weeks and months of training. We can get to grips with it really quickly, and then as we get experience with it, we can go even faster, right? It's also, as a result of all of the other points, quite cost effective because you can deliver some really complex applications in very little time, in very little man hours, in essence. So in that front, it's really cost effective. And finally, which goes with the kind of easy to handle element, it's also given access to developing applications to people that would not necessarily, or certainly by their usual roles, be developers as we know of them, right? Developers are usually quite technical people. Actually, local technologies have really widened the reach. They've enabled quite a lot of people that had logic, that were business focused, actually, to be able for them to develop apps and make them available for their users, for their community, or for the people working in the same department sometimes. So those are some of the great advantages of the local platforms. What we've seen by experience, however, is that we could come across some challenges, and the top one in the list is usually the inconsistency. What we mean by this is the inconsistency into which potentially we would put together an application. Right? We would use the different bricks, the different layers that the local platform gives us, but sometimes from one developer to the other, there would be different ways of handling business rules. There would be different ways of using the methods, the smart objects, etc. Which means that in the end, when you're trying to manage, 10, 20 applications, it could become cumbersome, especially if you want them to evolve. And actually, you do want them to evolve, because that's also the point of the local technology, is rapid evolution. So inconsistency could be an issue. Performance as well, again, but for the same reason of the inconsistency element, if from an architecture perspective it's not been necessarily thought through, or, as we've seen many times, there could be a small application that you've built for 5, 6, 7, 10 people, and then ultimately it grows, so you make changes, and then you end up with hundreds of people on it on a daily basis, and it's a bit suffocating on the weight of the volume of transactions. Scalability is kind of one of the same, but we have come across that before. And finally, is the governance/compliance element. So obviously, local gives us some really great tools to try and be consistent and therefore follow the guidelines of our beloved friends from the compliance team. But sometimes it's not always easy to follow them through. So based on that, the next two slides, and I'll come back to it in a minute, because what then I wanted to do is transpose what we do, as application creators on a daily basis to constructing a house, because it felt that it was quite relevant. So in the construction methodology, you have layers, right? You obviously have the foundation of your house. That's the base, that's the cement that is going to hold everything else. This is what's going to hold your structure, everything. Then you've got the first bits, right? You've got your walls, your doors, keeping it watertight, etc. The electrics, connection, data in the world, etc. And then finally you've got your second fix. This is the finish. This is what it's going to look like. It's your UI. It's how you decorate it, right? It's your, it's your wallpaper. It's your cabinets, all this kind of stuff. So you have in essence kind of 3 layers on which you build one after the other. And therefore, if I was to transpose that in our world, right, application creators or designers, then you could compare quickly 2 worlds. You have on one side the traditional development methodology, which we all know of, and we still do some of it every so often. So you still have the code underneath it all. That's the foundation. No matter what you do, there will be code at some point. Whether you touch it or not, it is there, right? If you go the traditional route, what you want to do is go beyond the code, you want to go quicker. So what you do is build a framework that's going to help you go faster. But in comparison, you know, the traditional route to the low code, actually, low code, in the first fix layer, right, already gives you that framework. You have the bricks to go faster, right? Is that copy and paste, that drag and drop element. You're already using things that are just readily available. You just need to assemble them, so you've gained time there. And then for your second fix, in the traditional methodology, then you go bespoke. It's more code, it's more work, it's more effort, it's quite lengthy and difficult. But actually, then for us, this is where we would implement the framework. So it's taking the framework that our local platform already gives us today, but to the next level. So it's almost really mastering the end-to-end process of delivering our application or this house within a frame that, you know, that helps you going quicker, yeah, and ultimately that gets rid of those challenges. That's what we want to do. Well, we want to get rid of the inconsistency. We want to perform better. We want to be able to do all of that stuff at scale. It doesn't matter if tomorrow there's 1,000 people coming into the platform, we'll be ready for it because it's been constructed the right way, following standards and the framework that we have defined for our context. And finally, across all of that stuff, if you apply consistency, performance, methodology, etc., governance and compliance will follow. Okay, so that is the heart of what we will talk about today, and that's what Amanda is going to try and apply into the Nintex K2 world. Ready?
Yes. All right. For me, when I was searching a little bit around frameworks and how it works, it felt, and it's always the same thing when you talk about framework, is how to enable the developer to go faster. So you bring and you put together some elements and then you duplicate it or you reuse it, and that is what is a framework, to speed the development, to use them only once and to have a central element. What we forget is that it's a lot more than that, a framework. A framework is, I think the first thing of a framework is the methodology that we are using to develop our applications, especially in K2 Nintex, is how we're gonna do all our applications from now on. It can be a template of K2 elements that we can inspire ourselves when we do develop. It can be common elements that we're gonna use that particular element to all of our projects. It can be a consistent layout as well, and that will be our framework as well, and that will drive a little bit the way we develop to make sure that it's consistent for the end users, etc. And we can have also a methodology of how we're gonna maintain all those applications, how we're gonna deploy even all those applications. So it can be many things when we talk about K2 Nintex framework. And the advantages of using a framework, well, they are massive. First of all, it's to implement, I would say, best practices to your organization. So this is how we would like us moving forward to develop all our applications. It can be just naming conventions, it can be the way the application will look and feel for the end users, it can be many things. Talking about the look and feel, it will be, for example, having a company branding guidelines. So all the users, regardless of which department, which profile is connecting, they don't need any training, they belong to the company, and they feel that all the applications that the company bring to them are consistent. So consistency, again, that's something that you would want to avoid inconsistency, obviously, and all the challenges that goes with it. The maintenance for support and developers, and making sure that we can, from an application to another one, kind of create new features and provide new features to the end users very quickly without having to go underneath every time and say, well, how it has been built and how can I bring that new functionality now. If I do change something, what it will impact, and that's the issue we facing most of the time. Say, okay, I would like to change something, and because something has been implemented, then it impacts many other things. And that's the mistakes that we do most of the time when we implement a framework. So when we think of a framework, we think, okay, I'm going to build attachment view or comment view or something that I can reuse to all my applications. And then the user requirements changes, and then whatever I do impacts all of my applications. So putting that into a framework then might be some of the common mistake we find. It's also taking a lot of time to implement a framework, so it needs time just to brainstorm, okay, what is the aim of that framework? What do we want to achieve? What are the right ways of implementing it? And like John constantly saying to me, framework are opinionated. So ask every developer in the room and you will have different framework. Ask end users, you will have a different framework as well. So it needs to be well thought before being able to implement it. Framework can evolve as well, same as an application can evolve, and it's hard most of the time to maintain because you couldn't think of everything the first time, and even if, or you kind of made everything into bugs, and then when you want to get out of that box, it becomes complicated. So that's all the issues that we are facing when we try to implement a framework, and that's what we wanted to cover as well as part of this session. So he was talking about houses, I will talk about cars, for us. So what we want to achieve when we create framework is giving the possibility to end users to choose their car. So we don't want to restrict end users in their requirements. We don't want to say, well, this is the way attachments are handled from now. This is the way. No, you want that innovation to stay the heart of the application. Okay, we can innovate the way we want, but underneath, you want the same engine for you to be able to develop faster the next feature that you would like to put, but also to maintain, also to improve the performance or whatever. If something changes as well underneath, so in the system that you're using in the organization or something like this, then it's easy to do, but you don't limit your end users and the business requirements. What you don't want to do is put a framework where you end up with the same car basically at the end, and you restrict your end users into that framework because this is the way moving forward and you've applied those best practices. So it's hard to find that balance, and well, after many discussions, it's always based on the end game and what you want to achieve with the K2 platform in general. So there is no one framework that will fit us all, but here is many ideas that you can pick and choose and apply into your context, and that will work for you. And I think the important thing that we wanted to also mention here is the framework has to be built to bring value for many profile. It's not only developers. When we talk framework, it's always, okay, how can I build something faster? But it's not really that. How can I build, okay, using reusable elements, using admin screen that I can manage, I don't know, many things around it. How can I build nice interface or something like this that I can easily maintain? But it's also in terms of the end users, the consistency that we want to bring into our applications. This is the layout, this is the navigation between sections. The user doesn't have to search every time, okay, where do I submit my request now? From an application to another one, so you don't want that. and it's bringing value as well for the support and maintenance team, obviously, by being able to bring more features as well and maintain easily the applications. And all of those things then bring your consistency and your compliance and governance elements to the framework. I think I went fast. I don't know if there was any question or anything that you wanted maybe to add or around it.
I've got a question actually, and it's from your experience. Have you tried to implement any of those frameworks before? Mini ones, part of anything, and if you had, what was your experience with it? Good or bad, or different, I guess?
I think from us at the outset, when we first started with K2, we brought in a few consultants that were supposed to be giving us best practice that didn't quite pan out. We did start off by creating common views that we thought, yeah, we'll use those throughout the applications. But I don't think, as you said, it didn't really pan out because you've got that one common view, then someone else says, oh, actually for this application, can we have that, and can we have this, and can we have that? So I think we just went away from that in the end, and we tend to now, for our applications, we'll just build a specific view
from scratch
for that application.
Okay. And so do you think it's because that view that you're talking about wasn't built with flexibility in mind to some extent, or?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just with our various teams that we've got, various departments, you know, one team will want something, another team will want something else. And it's the same throughout our business, isn't it, really? I mean, even with reports, I mean, there's just no real consistency that you can have. Everybody always wants something different. So,
yeah.
I mean, you could probably have a base there. I mean, I did try to build one view that has actually only been utilised in one form, but I did build that with the view that it could be used throughout multiple, with like the sort of the flexibility underneath in, you know, in SQL and everything else to actually enable that. But yeah.
It's exactly the car analogy. So every user wants 4 doors or maybe 2 doors and 4 wheels or 3 wheels or something like this. But at the end, as soon as you put them together, they want something that has a completely different shape. So
on a bike.
Electric scooter now. Can I add something to that? Like I've been in my career develop applications in more programming languages that I care to mention, because that's my job. The interesting thing about frameworks is always, where do you draw the line, right? So where do you stop generalizing? Because from that point onwards, it's going to be specific. And that's a bit clearer when you're in a code space, because you start, once you're writing code, you start realizing, okay, now it's too rigid for me, I need to, but in the low code space, I find it interesting that the line is a bit more not that clear. For example, the views, right? So K2 gives you the ability to really fast create views. The framework element of that could be, how do I use the rules? Like, what consistency do I use for my rules? But I think a major discussion about, should a view be reusable? It depends, right? So there are views that are to be reusable, but when you go to these, like the interactive views, the views that the user wants to do the job, probably everyone would want, like, you know, I want the field on top, no, I want the field on the bottom. So that's when you realize that, nah, that's never gonna standardize. But I think that it goes to the car analogy, right? Where do I stop building the engine? And where do I now think about what color of my car is going to be? I'm going to have 3 to 4 doors. I think that's a very interesting discussion, and it evolves through time, right? The more confident you become with the platform, the more experienced you become, you probably tend to generalize a bit less and get the tools to allow you to rapidly build. And another thing is that if you look at frameworks from a traditional perspective, then it's all about developing. But if you look at it from a low-code perspective, the toolings are a bit different. So there are more development mindset things that you need to standardize upon, but you also need to allow users the versatility to do their own thing, to build their own car with this.
That's
I
right.
suppose it's just reaching the threshold of where the commonalities are, isn't it, really? And
Yes.
then just from above then.
Well, one of the things, the other things I've been consistent to the conversations with Amanda, apart from the opinionated part, is that I never go into frameworks unless I've delivered 3 applications. Because if I start generalizing on the first application or the second applications, all my assumptions are going to be wrong. So after the third one, I start to understand what's an assumption, what's an exception. And the thing that I really want to highlight is don't start from the framework is not your starting point. It should be light in the start and growing as you grow.
Yes, that's right. I think going back to one of the points that you made around the challenges we've seen, before, is that it would take a lot of time to put together. Sometimes we try and overcook it from day one. Let's just try and look at that big picture, what everything we can automate or whatever, and then ultimately it may come down to some tactical elements. Just to start with, and those tactical elements will evolve over time anyway. You will adjust them to make them better for you, for the display interfaces for your end users, the functions that you're trying to utilize into your apps, etc., etc. Because it's probably it's easier and you'd go faster if you try and start small and then do more of it, as opposed to do that big factory that will just take months or years even before you get something. And then by the time it's released, guess what?
Yeah.
It's probably not up to date anymore. I was going to say it's a bad word.
I think and that's also another point of view where, for example, the first thing is reusable elements. I think we all tried to reuse views because that was the first thing we had in mind when we talked about K2. The view can be drag and dropped anywhere, and then we can reuse. So that's good eventually when you have like hidden views that kind of have generic rules where you have like, okay, they handle user accesses, they handle, I don't know, redirection to the portal, they handle some very generic elements that you will find on every application. Why not? Translation, for example, that you would build into a view, the logic and everything, and then you will put that view into all your applications and then color that translation part, for example, if needed. And then we went on the other side. Well, in my experience, that's when what I did anyway. It's go with flexible elements, and then I started to do everything flexible. It was so flexible and so smart and everything that even a small change took me a lot of time to implement because I needed to configure I don't know how many things because of that flexibility. So it's to find that balance between, okay, not being so rigid and not being so flexible that, well, you get something that was supposed to be a small change becomes a nightmare because there's so many things to consider as well as part of the framework.
I just wanted to pause there for a moment, just ask anyone online if they had a question that maybe you wanted to ask or add a comment in based on the experiences you guys have had. Feel free to unmute or add it into the chat and we can share it with everyone here.
Yeah. I think good, going back to the cardology element, ultimately it's your framework, and it will be your framework because it will belong to you because of your context, your business context. Is how do you implement consistency and standardization, but with striking the balance by not limiting innovation and personalization. It's where do you put the needle and how do you reach that balance, basically.
That's the
There's many
question.
things also to consider, which is training and maintenance of that framework.
Yes.
Ultimately as well, if you do something very flexible that needs, I don't know, a lot of training for the developers, then it's probably not the best way as well to go, because at the end, well, they might not follow it. You will end up with plenty different way of developing again.
So unless we've got some more questions, we had the right plans, but we've gone quicker than expected. So shall we crack on with the next topics? Unless
if you'd like, I'd throw my hat in the ring. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we've had basically the exact same journey through to all of this. It is starting out, you build one or two apps, you find, hey, it would be useful to have a standardized system. I mean, one thing that we find, the real bulk of the work that's done in K2 is running through predefined checklists, and we found that was the first form that we standardized as a multi-application form, and really got a lot of value out of that. It went into many different systems and really got integrated. And the problem was that eventually it was integrated and someone asked for a feature and suddenly you can't implement it because it's going to be affecting everything else. Which is then where we started saying, well, we'll learn from how we built that form and just build it every single time whenever we need it. And my feeling was always that this was kind of an inherent problem of K2 with the way that the views are bound to smart objects, and that really if we wanted anything like reusable, it would have to be sort of a legless view that we have to then hook up to the back end on a case-by-case basis. And really the thing is that now the consistency through in our development is solely enforced by standards upon standards upon standards and reviewing constantly, and that has slowed down our development massively, but it is slowly improving the standardization and the actual the quality of what we're putting out. But yeah, just there you go. Okay.
React to that?
Yes, I have something. Remember that I said earlier about I'm very excited about custom controls.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing, I think the main issue with, and I have my share of building frameworks on K2 that profoundly failed in adoption. But the main thing is that the only reusable component in terms of user interface in the K2 platform are views. And as you said, views are tied to smart objects. Now, with custom controls, that's going to change. Now, you could tie your custom control to a smart object, and you can have more specific reusable components, not just a view, but reusable components that build your view. Right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that one thing that we found interesting, particularly with the shift back to K2 On-Prem, is that we also have an SDK that someone, and we're using it in things we do in pre-sales and Nintex to showcase demos, is that in frameworks there's always two approaches, like it's templating or inheritance. So inheritance is I build it and I reuse it. Templating is I build a template that gets me 80% there, so then I have 20% of things to fix, right? We found that using the SDK to generate views and forms programmatically out of the standards that you say is a bit more effective than trying to reuse views. So imagine if you have applications that can be generated based on specific configuration that you already have. So you don't maintain a view that tries to fit all of the cases. You generate views specifically for this use case, but you put the consistency and the standards and the practices in the source code of the SDK, and then you use the SDK to generate those in a consistent way. So we found that a bit more dependable and a bit more future-proof. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much effort you do, there are always going to be exceptions. And there's going to be at least one exception in every app you build. Right? Reality. So just those two things to keep in mind.
Thanks. I've just got, Rick has just mentioned something in the chat. Did you want to add to that, Amanda? Before
it was just to complete the answer. So regarding your issue of the fact that you're slowing down the development basically of the applications. One of the ways that I found that are efficient in a sense is with experience. I found that 90% of the applications are based on a SQL database, and some of them are based completely on a third-party tool like SharePoint or whatever, but most of them are driven, well, all the business data is in the database. If you look at the tables that you will create for an application, they're kind of always the same. You would have some reference data, you would have some process settings, process information that will be kind of consistent within all your application. You have your main request, the request comments, the request action history, things like this that you can kind of build or pre-script, and then it's easy to deploy every time. So you have that base that, okay, any user can any developer can reuse. Those are the main tables. They just need to replace request by whatever is the name of the request, and then it generates the 5-6 tables and 5-6 stored procedural views that you would like to use. Then there's the views that are kind of the same, but you don't want to have common ones. So like, I don't know, comment or actions, you always have like that. Save changes, submit, cancel, basically. I don't know, a banner or something that you don't want to reuse for whatever reason, or some elements, administration screen are quite similar. It might look or feel a little bit different, but at the bottom they do the same, and they are based on the kind of the same structure of the data. So you could build a package, a K2 package, and redeploy it every time that you want to create a new application. We can't do that because all of our customers are in different versions of K2, which make it a little bit difficult for us to maintain. Now it's easier with K2 Five, but it wasn't that easy before. But if you have only one version of K2, you can use that one. And you said because it's so based on a smart object, it makes it difficult to do these kind of things. Well, using the K2 package and deployment, you could say, well, don't use that smart object, use that one. And because the structure is the same, and that's what you have to put your thought in, okay, how can I build that stored procedure or smart object that, or elements that can have the same structure? And because it's really based on the structure has to be smart. And then you can say, well, actually my view is not named this, now it's named this one. And my smart object, don't use that one, but use that one. And then when you deploy it, you get that package already built. That can help.
Yeah, using package and deploy to switch up which application a view is for is something I haven't really considered.
And rename elements.
I think I had too many bad experiences of package and deploy in years gone by that I kind of avoid it if I can until really is moved between one environment to the next.
It was bad for many things, but it was really good for that. To rename elements or to reuse now elements that were not part of the package or something like this. So I find it very nice to just rename. So, for example, applications completely.
And I guess this will definitely, by definition, help you follow your own standards. If at least you have your 50%, that's pretty big, or you will conform with whatever the standard needs to be. That's probably a starting point.
On a funny note, I remember a specific product manager before the acquisition, who's no longer with us, that told me at some point, John, I need you to understand, I don't want to hear anything about package and deployment ever again.
John, Amanda, could you comment on Rick's comment on the chat at all? I think Rick was just sharing an example of where he's used a general SQL table, but I think it'd be good if you could read that out and offer your thoughts on it.
For example, about a certain framework, we create the general SQL table called general.company, which we use in all of our K2 applications. We use it to read out certain data based on certain entity. Another one is accessing SharePoint objects in K2. We do that via data labels and use HTML by using an expression so that the K2 application is not dependent on every SharePoint object used in all applications. I'll say something, Rick. I remember I did a presentation back in the day, and my first slide was French don't allow friends to put CSS and JavaScript in data labels. That said, I think these are great examples of things that can actually be generic. Like, my advice every time is don't generalize the view, the data view, the line of business data view. That's never going to work. But there are elements of your application that you don't want to ever touch, like the company information or the organization information or the actions that you take on a form. So these are I think these are great examples. About the accessing SharePoint objects in K2, I don't quite understand what Rick is saying here. I mean,
Rick, it might be worth if you wanted to unmute and just maybe share a little bit more about that. That'd be useful.
Oh, yeah, we can agree on that. We can all agree. I think we can all agree on that one. I get you now. So you don't want to create ties, dependencies on SharePoint, because when you PND from one SharePoint instance to the other instance, it's an experience that you go through once and you never want to do it again. Yes. That's it. Yeah, I feel you. I feel you, and I agree with whatever you do. Do not go through this pain. Exactly. They're mostly not consistent, and no two SharePoint environments are ever consistent, no matter what anyone tells you.
Yeah, I think we've seen the exact same thing. We've got two SharePoint environments, and everything appears to be consistent, and yet the backend deploy just doesn't let us do it.
It never is.
We've got into this routine of deploying to our production environments and going through all of the views that connect to SharePoint and just opening, saving, closing, and now they're working
Yeah.
again. But it's just it's a consistent experience now.
Nintex RTA can be very helpful in that one. They build a bot that goes after PNT and goes like open new save, open new
Hopefully
save.
we won't have to deal with a robot that does that.
I mean, at the end of the day, these are two examples. The first one is, I think you're going to see some of those first, like the general company example, you're going to see something that I show. The second thing about the K2, this is more in the creative space that we will have to go when we go with low-code platforms, right? We tend to be, like, the interesting thing about low-code platforms is that you need some sort of development mindset when you start building applications, but you also need the ability to not be a developer when you have to go through these creative approaches of solving problems. So the justification sometimes is just because. In this case, it's because SharePoint is never consistent. Even if I image something, like if one person goes in the list, adds a column, done. My application is not going to be deployed. So image start, yes. So these are cases that, again, although this approach, the data labels and HTML for SharePoint, this is part of a framework. The policies and the practices you talked about earlier, these are part of a framework. A framework is not only code, right? As Amanda's going to say, framework is, for me, is primarily methodology, and at the end of the time, it's governance. Everything is between is how to accelerate delivery. But a framework should be the methodology that we build our apps, and the governance we apply so that this methodology can be consistently applied through our systems. For me, that's the meat and bone of the framework. Everything else is dependent on a lot of unknowns, a lot of assumptions, and basically a lot of exceptions. So, Rick, I agree with, have to agree with both of the things you said here. The company table is a perfect example of a reusable component, and the data labels are, I hate to say, but a good example of making sure that the platform works for you and you don't work for the platform, should I say it that way. Okay, it's my turn.
Okay.
What do we want to do? Do we need 5-minute break, or shall we get into the cool stuff right now? It's open.
Yeah, go.
Yeah.
Right, cool. So let's go.
So
Without transition.
could you just let them know online what time we need to start?
Let's just carry on. I think that's the
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
carry on.
Brilliant.
Okay, then I'm
John, I
gonna
think you
share.
can start sharing on your side. This is what. Yeah, let's go away. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, go.
So, I'm going to show you some examples now of consistency and reusability and all those great buzzwords. As Amanda pointed out, I always say that frameworks are opinionated approaches, and what I'm showing you here is our own opinionated approach. Our requirement is to do great demos and do them and build great demos faster. So we've built our own framework for this, and I'm using this framework to showcase some of the elements that we've been talking about. So what you see here is a pretty basic example of a K2 application. We have a header view, that's a reusable view. So you're going to see this header view across a lot of applications that I'm going to show. Standard information about the logo of the company, the title of the application, the language control, and the user who's logged in. Then our favorite tabs. Then we have another view which we call the KPI view. We show a couple of information about the application plus the main actions like submit a new request, look at some reporting, and administer the application. And then we have a list of all the open cases, should we say, or of the open requests that we have, right? The tabs are pretty standard. My tasks, so it's a work list of all the tasks that are assigned to me. The process is an interesting one. So in this case, you see an integration with Nintex Process Manager. So this is basically the process, the documentation of the process that is this application is working on. And eventually there's a QR code, and you can actually scan this if you want and participate through your mobile devices. That's going to work. We've tested that, so that works as well. Now, we have all those components. Now, one of the things that, and actually for this framework, we do use the SDK to generate these applications in a consistent way. A new request form is going to be pretty simple. All the basic things we need, plus a couple of additional feedback, as you're going to see. So in this scenario, you're going to see that we have from the request title all the way to the dynamic demo approver. It's going to be consistent through the rest of the views you're going to see, but this view is going to also have additional fields on an application basis. So this is an example of a view that part of it is reusable, but part of it is specific. And how do we do it? We use the SDK to pre-generate those views. Now, one of the things that I'm really very excited about is, and I'm going to leave this open here, is the style profiles. And the reason I'm excited about the style... Hello? Not me?
No, your laptop. I know, it's my laptop, probably.
Is it yours?
Yeah, I think so.
Sometimes Teams is calling you even if you're in a call.
Okay, hopefully this will end soon. There we go. So first technical glitch. That's 15 in. It's okay. We've done well so far.
So we've, I'm really interesting about, well, I find style profile is interesting. Are you guys across what a style profile is? Right. So instead of putting JavaScript and HTML and CSS in data labels, we can now properly use style profiles to basically define the color scheme of our application, plus include any CSS and JavaScript we want. Now the really valuable thing there is that these are loaded properly in the form as they should be loaded. We're not injecting something, we're not hacking something. So we put some effort to kind of improve the look and feel of our applications. And we are working on something, on a style profile for this specific one that looks something like this. So this is exactly the same form as you saw earlier, for a different application with the tabs represented as a sidebar, some really nice pictures and fonts for the list view and stuff. The new request for same thing looks like these. As you see, this is what I was saying. This is a completely different application, but you see the same set of fields for the request title up to the dynamic demo approval, and you see custom field 1 and custom field 2 because we're very creative with the demo data, so we just use custom field 1 and custom field 2. Now, the thing about this is that it's not a style profile that you can use in whatever, like if you give me a random form and I apply this style profile, it's not going to look good, because in order for us to achieve that, it means that we have a consistent way of building our applications. It doesn't require having reusable elements, but it requires some consistency, mostly around the standards and the practices that you said about. Are we using tabs? How do we name our views? How do we name our controls so that we're able to target them appropriately and transform them into what you see right now? I'm going to show you an example of this. So let's open up 2 applications I generated for the sake of this workshop. So the first one is, I called it purchase request. Has nothing to do with purchase requests, but that was a cool name to use. Again, now you see the consistency, right? You see, now we're kind of in the same car analogy. Like this is now, like this is a Tesla and a Toyota looking exactly the same, right? That's not a bad thing if that's what you want to achieve. But what I want to highlight here is, what if I go and apply the style profile I have to this form now, right? So I have the consistency. I know that I'm building applications the same way. I tick all my boxes on the standards. So now I'm going to go to my designer and I'm going to open the form, which is this one in our case. I'm going to edit the form. I'm going to change the style profile to be the one I call the PSF. This stands for Pre-Sales Framework. I'm going to save this. Yes. Save again. Okay. Now I'm going to refresh that. And you see it looks like this now. So, lesson learned. If I am consistent on how to build my applications, I can offer some wow effect to my users, because I think we'll all agree that one of the things that no one likes on K2 is how old smartphones look. So if we are consistent on how we're building it, it means we can actually make them a bit more interesting for the end users. Now, I want you to look at something. If I click on this new, I told you the sidebar is tabs, right? So if I click on the new request on that form, you'll see that I'm using views here, not tabs. So you request details, attachment, signature, and edit stage instructions. Now let me go and apply the same style profile on the new item view. So it's a new case view. Save, check out because I forgot again, as always, yes, and save. I think that happens to everyone, right? Yeah. Now let me refresh that. And what you're going to see something interesting here. I'll get the style profile, but I'm not going to get any sidebar options. So I still get the views. Now, why does this look like this? But if I go to the, remember, if I go to the one I'm using as my graphics workshop application that I use to actually build the style profile against. If I go to the new request, you'll see that the sidebar is going to have all the options. Now, why is that? Remember when I told you in the beginning that I always try to have at least 3 applications before I start standardizing, right? So what happened here is during the development of the style profile, we realized that if we want to have consistency, and meaning that the end user, our users need to look at the sidebar and always see the options there, then we needed to change our approach. We started this form using views. And while we're building the style profile, we hit that form and we started brainstorming about, can we also make the views appear on the side, right? And eventually we said, no, we're just going to use tabs. So that drove us, after having 4 to 5 applications, that single change drove us to go, okay, now we need to address this and introduce consistency on the new form in the form of tabs. So imagine if I have invested in my style profile from the beginning and investing, because this is not an easy task to do. And eventually the users came back to me from the field and said like, no, we like views, we don't like tabs. That would be not a great assumption that we made, right? So that's the value of experimenting before generalizing. You need to give a couple of alternatives to the users, your internal customers. Realize what do they prefer, and based on that, then come back and start generalizing the elements you need, right? Now, the third thing I'm going to show you is what if I just went and I wanted to change for a different department, for example. Let's say that I have another application, let's call it the insurance claims one. And in the insurance claim one, I just want a kind of a different branding before the claim, because the claims department like a different color scheme. So I'm just created another style profile with a bit of a different CSS that allows a different color scheme to flow. So now I can go on the K2 Designer. I'm going to close this one. I'm going to go to the next applications I have, the home page. You can even see the consistency in the 2 applications on what's being generated here, right? And these are all generated using the SDK. So you can see now that every application has a level of consistency in design experience as well. Meaning that if I'm building applications and I open a folder that has an application, what I'm going to see as a developer is going to, it's like muscle memory. I'm going to know what I need to change, when I need to change that. And that's what actually accelerates development. Let me open this one. And apply a different style profile. I'm going to apply the claims one. Save, check out, again, all paste, save. So now, if I refresh that, you're going to see exactly the same thing, but with a pretty nice orange on the sidebar. Now, that kind of gets us a bit outside of the low code and into the code space. And there's a reason that's low code and that's not no code. What it means is that it does take some thought and some experience on how do I structure the elements of my style profile so that I can be able to achieve that. In the case of colors, it will be that I go to the style profile, I change the color, I use some JS and some CSS files I've had, and it all works fine. Now, one of the things that we do is, let's say that the fonts are not quite to my liking, and I want to change the fonts. Now I have 2 style profiles, maybe I have 10 of them. how do I change the fonts in one place and they change everywhere? Because from a branding perspective, the font is the font and the colors are mostly part of your brand. It's not something you don't have deviations, like I can use the blue or I can use the Nintex orange or the Nintex blue, but I can't use, for example, the K2 green because it's not part of the Nintex branding anymore. So there is an element of how do you structure your files. And it's a different skill set there, right? It's not a K2 development skill set. Probably this is going to be happening by someone who is in the UX space, probably a designer who's more savvy with CSS and JavaScript, different tooling. And the thing you don't want to do is you don't want them to understand K2. They don't need to understand K2, and it's going to be something they will not going to like. They like to do what they want to do best. So we've structured our style profile a bit, like isolated the CSS and the JS, but we also have our fonts in a different file that we include. So now if I just go and comment out the Montserrat font and I uncomment out the Sofia font, I don't know how technical you want me to get, but if you want to get more technical on that and conversation, feel free to grab me afterwards and explain a lot of things. One of the interesting things in this is how we're using a system, a specific design system like material design. In that case, we load material icons and we replace the icons on the toolbars and the out-of-the-box icons of K2, and then we just add a couple of fonts really. So now that I've changed the fonts from Montserrat to Sofia, I've saved it, and I think it's going to take a control refresh. So if I do that, you see now that the fonts have changed on that style profile. And if I go and change the, if I go back to the purchase requests, we see the same fonts here. So, I think that style profiles are a very, very powerful element of the K2. I think it was 5.6 release that we actually added the ability to inject CSS and JS. But in order to use these effectively, we need to have consistency in the way we do the app. Again, each one of you is going to have a different approach to what building an app means, and that's fine as long as throughout the organization the same practices and the same methodology is used. Now that's all around the first point I wanted to show, right? I think the second topic, I think we've got the slide there. It's reusable components. So just by looking at this, I'm going to show you another example on how it works.
Can I interject here? I don't know if you guys have already used the style profile at all, whether in 5.5, which was
just the colors, right?
Yeah, it was just the colors version of it, but now 5.6 where it's, you can do a lot more. And if you have, what was your experience of it? And if anything that Jonas showed us just now kind of resonates for you.
And I think there is two elements that we wanted to highlight here is and he kept saying it, is the consistency. So now that it's a new feature, it's very good to implement it to all the applications, and with just a little bit of nice CSS and JS or something like this, we could have.
There was not that consistent way of building applications to existing customers. We find it hard then to build like very far elements into more when it comes to design because of that. So yeah, that was I think one of the important things. We can push it very far.
Yeah, we've definitely taken on board the style profiles for integrating our JavaScript now. I think in general, we've just found that in the past it was easier. We just edited our base form ASP.NET files so they could include JavaScript, and it it led to us having really, really bad maintenance on our JavaScript because, again, it was the package and deploy side of things when we're having to edit the files and restart AS and everything like that. When you do an upgrade, it's actually losing any of the customizations to those files. So yeah, the clarity of this system is much better now. Individual files for multiple functionality. We then can trust that is being deployed as part of the style profile. It's definitely
And you can go into proper development deployments.
Yeah, it was,
that kind of stuff.
I think yeah, it was that cool thing of knowing that we tried to implement different systems for our JavaScript integration before. All of them were substandard and required, keeping on top and checking every single asset that's being deployed. Doing things like framework code, smart objects, loading function definitions into data labels and things like that. And so when you're doing a package and deploy, saying, oh, have we got the reference to the code smart object? Oh, okay, I need to make sure I'm going and deploying the code itself from the story JavaScript in SQL tables, and so with things like that going on, it really wasn't maintainable. But yeah, this is definitely much more useful.
Just to highlight this, so you see that in this style profile I use, and actually this is a K2 Cloud environment, just to be clear. So it's the same for K2 Five, but just use K2 Cloud environment for demos. But you see that I've used, I'm using Azure Blob Storage to load these files. Now in the next iteration, the one I actually shared with Amanda, is we're using a GitHub. So basically, we do our development exactly as we should be doing the development of JS and CSS, exactly as the developer would expect his job to be done. And once we commit everything in GitHub, then it automatically updates. And you can take this up to development, UAT. You can integrate with the actions. You can go into more DevOps, things that we were not able of doing back in the K2 days. It's way more feasible now with Nintex On-Prem.
Yeah, I mean, my management is desperate for us to have some level of sort of control in place, and obviously with K2 we don't really have that ability, but at least we've got some.
I'm about to challenge that.
Oh, okay.
I'm about to challenge that, yes. So let me talk about reusable components before I go to central management and governance, which is fine. So I'll challenge it in some ways. Okay, cool. Just to highlight something that if you are consistent, one of the things, what could you achieve? And what I'm going to show you right now, take it with a grain of salt, because that has some substantial JavaScript behind it. But we're looking at previous, this is pre-style profiles. This is work we've done that actually led to style profiles. But you see the carousel here. This carousel is a list view, actually. We use JavaScript and CSS to actually present the list view as an open source custom control. That's a carousel, right? And you can see the legacy. If I click on an application, you can see the legacy of what you saw in style profiles in the old framework that we have called regulation. So you see again, there is a level of consistency there, right? The difference between this and the style profiles is that this takes way too much time to load because we're hacking our way with JavaScript. In style profiles, because everything is loaded by the product now, no performance issues, no flickering of the screens, nothing like that. Now, any questions before I go to show you a bit of usability element?
Ian's just mentioned awesome demo, well done. So thank you. I think everybody's satisfied so far.
Thank you. It's been really exciting for us to be able to do this kind of stuff with K2, and that's why I'm really excited about the custom controls that are going to follow. Now, on to the next thing. I think this is the one. So, what I want to show you now is that a different application on the same framework.
And that's on a different server. So this is now something that we created somewhere and we package and we deploy to a different server. Now, we had this use case that we had to deploy the same application in, let me show you how many servers. In all of those servers. All of those environments, we had to actually P&D the application we built in all of those environments. Now, raise your hand, is everyone online or here thought that this would be an easy job? Thank you. So we needed to, I'm going to cover the governance element afterwards. What I want to show you now is a bit of the reusability elements and why reusable components are really valuable. And again, we're talking about reusable components when it doesn't have to do with line of business data. And everything, something has to do with data of the business or the process, things like I would never advise on making a reusable queue, for example, that will that has any data entry elements in that. But if I, for example, go in the help desk, let me go to the home page. Let me go here and go here and click on the home page. Okay, now this is the application. You see I have 2 demo cases here. It looks exactly the same as the other one. If I double click on this one, I'm going to get the case details here. And this is more of a case management approach that K2 is really great at. So the difference of the case management from process management is that process management is like the train. Like you put on the trucks, this is step 1, step 2, step 3, done. Case management is more like, yeah, the train will decide to take a turn because I need to do a random call with the customer or because I need to. So one of the things we incorporated as we look at the case details is a stage progression element. So all of our applications have the same stage progression. Everything has its own stages, but the concept of a stage progression is common to all of our apps. So the data is different, the stages that the case is going to go through are different, but all of our cases have stages, right? Now, the interesting thing is the case actions. So you see some of those case actions are blue. I don't think if you can see the screen. So schedule meeting is blue, send an email is blue, start that task is blue. The rest of the cases are black. And we could go with hiding and showing those. We decided to just change the color just to highlight the point we want to make. The thing is that not all cases are going to have the same case action. Right, so some of the cases will require an ad hoc task. Some of the cases might be prohibited to have an ad hoc task. So we also have these admin screens, Amanda earlier discussed about, where we have our help desk support application. These are the stages that it's going to go through, and you see the actions. And you see that some of the actions are true. So if I go to this application and I say that the cancel stage is enabled now, and the scheduled meetings and the send an email or SMS is not enabled, and I say that, if I refresh here, you'll see that the blue thing, the blue cases are going to change to reflect those cases that are actually available for this particular application. Now, pretty simple example, but very powerful when it comes to reusable components, because now I can go and configure how my application behaves instead of build how my application behaves. This for me is the perfect example of a reusable element. Something that all of my applications or 80% of my applications are going to use, that I can configure on an application based on how it works. For me, this is only what a reusable component on K2 should be. It should be something that more than 80% of my applications use, and I can configure how it works on an application basis. Cool. Now, the last bit I want to talk about is is governance. As I said, we had to deploy everything on those ridiculous amount of servers. Now, these applications use K2 roles. They have specific configuration, security configuration for categories on what things people can access or not. So how do you deploy the application and make sure that all of those things are deployed? I mean, you know that package deployment doesn't deploy roles, right? So basically, a lot of people do not use K2 roles because what? Do I have to go and maintain and create them every time? Or category security, hey, that's a party. Like if you start going now and I want people to have access to this app, but I don't want people to have access to the other app. And how do I structure my categories? Where do I put my apps? Do I have a folder of reusable components? And who can actually edit the reusable components? These are all things that we prefer. All of us would love not to have anything to do with it, but we have to. So when I saw that we have to deploy all those environments, I realized there's something that I need to do, right? So I had roles. I had different users per environment that need to go to those roles. And I needed a way to basically deploy and configure it as fast as streamline as possible. Now, one of the hidden gems of K2 is the management objects. Have you been across the K2 management objects? Have you used K2 management objects, like the smart objects that control the roles, the smart objects that control category security? Please, for the people online, raise your hand if you have used the management objects. The reason I'm asking is because those objects are what make K2 work, and we can actually use those objects in our solutions. So we can create governance applications for K2 that govern K2 itself. One of the things that we're very proud, right from the get-go, is that whenever a customer requests a K2 instance, there is a K2 workflow that provides the K2 cloud instance. So K2 serves K2. So the first thing I need to do is I need to have some way of creating the roles in every environment. So every time I was packaging, delivering something, I needed to have a smart object that said, these are all the roles that I need in this environment, deploy them with PND, and then I just need a workflow that will go and make sure that these roles are created. So I started with this security configuration screen, very not appealing to the eye, but gets the job done. So what you see here is I have a list of roles. I'll create one here. Let's say this is a new role, demo role. I'm very creative, as I said, with the things I'm using for my demo purposes. I'm going to save that, and just for the sake of making sure I'm not smoke and mirroring everyone. So you see that these are the roles in the system. This is exactly the same view as if I go to admin, to management, and go this view. This is what you're going to see. So the moment I go now and I apply this, the workflow is going to kick in the back. It's going to read all the roles, update all the descriptions for the roles that exist, and create the roles that do not exist. I think it should execute it now. So if I refresh that, is it on the next page? Yeah, it's on the next page, I think. Ah, there it is, a new role. So now it's available for me. So what did I do? The moment I packaged and deployed, I had all the rules in place in a smart box. The moment I deployed, all I have to do is go to that page, click the apply button, and all of those roles are going to appear to the environment I deployed. Okay, now the next thing, which I'm not going to hit apply because I haven't completed that workflow yet, is the configuration of the categories. So this is a bit too complicated now to break it down, but basically it's a way to say, on this environment, I want you to have this category, I want you to have this folder, and I want you to apply this security on this category. And just to highlight the use of roles, because I'm using roles for security, I can now go here and say, I want the new print my security, save it, boom, done. Okay, so first things first, I can automate the control, I can automate the creation of roles and the category security. Just an example of things I can do to automate the governance of an application. Obviously, the next step is, okay, now I have the roles. I have the security configuration. I need users in those roles. So as you'll see here, a bit more refined solution is on this environment. For the sake of these environments, we have on-demand user, instant user 1, 2, 3, and demo users. These are the 4 roles, the 5 roles per environment. So I made a view that I can specify for each environment which users belong in those roles. And the moment I hit apply configuration, I will, the workflow is going to assign those users to roles. So I created the roles, I configured the security for the categories of those roles, I assign users to those roles, my application is ready to work. And a little trick here is you see the KUID that we have for the environment, which is the on K2 Cloud is the ID of the environment. So I can only hit the apply configuration if I am on the environment I'm targeting. So in this one, I think it's going to be available for this one. There you go. So I can't accidentally in another environment hit the button and mess up all the security configuration I've done. So these are a couple of things I wanted to show you, along with the fact that I have a workspace that basically sums up all of the governance activities I need for that server. And by the way, the next step we're doing for this is actually automating the configuration of workspaces as well for applications. So roles, category security, and workspaces are the 3 mostly used elements of an application that are not part of the application itself. It's about the configuration of it. And this is a one-stop shop for everyone who manages. I've even surfaced workflow errors here. Pretty straightforward. So I can see all the workflows happening in error. If that's a development environment, just to make it clear, that's why you see those errors. And that kind of concludes the 3 pillars I want to showcase. How far consistency can take us if we establish this. What is an effective reusable component in the context of the K2 app? And how can I streamline governance of applications? Now, for me, along with the methodology, that's what Amanda is going to talk afterwards. For me, this is what constitutes a successful framework. Just to give you an idea of how successful this framework has been for us, it took me about 5 minutes yesterday to generate the 2 apps I showed you today, and then apply the same stuff across them. Literally, I think it took me like 5 minutes to specify the one and 5 minutes to specify the other. Click the generate app, the app was generated, and then I started playing around with the number of apps. The only reason this worked was because I had consistency in my application, so the style profiles that applied looked exactly the same on any application I chose.
Just a few comments on that.
Okay.
Based on your question.
Yes.
Your question was how you use management of objects.
Yeah.
Mixed response. Jean-Jacques.
I love his response.
Yeah,
Definitely.
And then Rick have been using.
Rick, yes, obviously, but there's a difference between AD groups and K2 roles, and particularly on how versatile K2 roles are when you come to task assignments, task escalations, and all that things. For example, if you assign a task to an AD user and the AD user drops out of the organization, then you have a workload you go and need to fix. But if you assign a role, then the task will always go to the K2 role, not the K2 user. So if a user leaves the organization, just add another user to the role, and then it works. So from a security perspective, I always prefer using K2 roles, securities and tasks, because it gives me a bit of a bigger umbrella on how to manage these changes in terms of who is responsible from this task. Not even leading, but even if it's a financial approval, sometimes the financial approvals change, or your lead request of the project.
You know, we would typically always do that via AD groups, which luckily someone else manages.
Exactly.
So that, I think that's the problem for me. So what I was looking at there is like the management objects, do they allow you to add users to the roles or add groups to the roles?
That's what I showed you earlier, right? So
I think what is important is here, for example, he applied a framework that works for him and for the purpose that he wanted to get out of the platform. For example, for us, we have a complete different approach when it comes to framework because we have a different aim at the end. And for example, the way I would showcase is definitely not using roles because on our side, with this application, for example, AD groups are managed by AD users, and they prefer it that way. So this is now the way we do things, and because it's normally consistent within an organization, then this is okay. As part of my framework, all the users management are going to be AD groups / users, where as part of the PSF, it needs to be roles because it's showing all the full capabilities of K2 and the advantages of all the K2 features. So it's
because frameworks are opinionated, right? So this is what we're for us.
And there is something you told me as well. It's not only opinionated. It's also based on your team skills, and that is very important to consider. So I'm more comfortable with SQL and K2. I'm not comfortable with being able to generate forms and views using the SDK, which is for me, it requires a lot of development skills that I don't have, for example, on my team. So, okay, let's forget about that. Or I have CSS, I have a designer on my team. So I'm gonna make sure on my side, on my K2 team, to have a consistent layout because my designer is amazing and he's going to blow everyone's mind using very pushed CSS and GS. So it depends really on your team skills.
And on the requirements, right? For example, in our case, we didn't want to have to go to an Nintex IT every time we want to change something. So in our case, for our requirements, K2 roles fit a purpose. Maybe there are cases that K2 roles still fit a purpose for a specific thing. All I want to highlight here is that it's not about the roles, it's not about the security, it's about the ability of K2 to manage K2 with not only build apps for end users. And the reason is that in terms of governance, it falls a lot onto IT to maintain those things, right? So you talked about scalability, for example. I mean, it's not easy to grow from one application. A successful K2 implementation is a nightmare for IT. Like you're moving from one app to, do I have to manage 10, 20 now? How will I do it? All I wanted to showcase is that K2 gives you the weapons you need to start tackling those problems by using K2 itself. In terms of DevOps, because I own that one. So every workflow is a REST endpoint, right? So if let's assume you have a CI/CD pipeline that you say, I test my app, I package my app, I put it on my version control system. When I put it on my version control system, I want to use PowerShell automation to deploy the PND. And after that, I want to hook up to my CI/CD system in Jenkins or Azure DevOps or whatever. Trigger that workflow that will configure the roles, and trigger that workflow that will configure security. So now you start blending it with your DevOps approach when you go from I have a test, I need to move it to UAT, then I need to move it to Pro. And I could even argue that it might be a K2 workflow that actually manages this process. I package something, I deploy it to UAT, I configure it to UAT, I get the feedback from the users, I tick all the boxes, then I move to production. It can be done. What you're not going to be able to do is version track the specific version of the view. But if you want to have a version track of the package and the configuration that goes with it, then you can't create DevOps pipelines.
Yeah, and that's where we've settled down. It's trying to again, this is about consistency in how we do our package and deployment as well. But then, knowing that we're going to, the goal is to move to the scripting of the package deploying. And that will then let us hand it off to our environment people, basically.
I think I can pass on to either the break or to Matt.
Yeah, I think before we move on, I just wanted to wrap up on your section and the three blocks that you've shown us today. One being the site profile management, second was the reusable components, and then the kind of in-depth central management feature. It's like you applied K2 mindset. Yes.
Well, I'll leave comments and attachments. I think these are mostly I think that Amanda is going to have a lot of discussion on those points.
Yes. Was there any questions on the reusable stuff or even the central management piece that John showed us now? You wanted to add something about that?
Yeah, it was just basically when we were talking a lot about framework, we realized, like, especially based on the skills, based on the company way of doing things, we have completely different meaning when it comes to framework. And while we took an approach that on my part of the demo that is more like, I don't like to say citizen developers, but it's more like, okay, how can I, without much skills, how can I redeploy, go to build an application very easily, and how can I make it very consistent from one application to the other? When you get more comfortable and have more technical skills, etc., you can push it even further with the style profile, with IT compliance, management part of K2, etc. So that's all the different angles. We normally see one or the other.
I think it's more of a complementary thing, though. At the end of the day, it complements each other. Like, I do believe that people should start and invest where they're comfortable in. What I want to showcase is that, and as you grow and as you evolve and as you adopt, you don't have to be afraid that it's going to fall over because of governance. Because there are things you can do to actually support your growth, support your evolution, support the adoption of the product. One of the things that there was a very colorful slide in K2, which showed like K2 adoption, and it was like, it takes about 6 months for the first app. And then you start like, so yes, it takes that much for the first app. The idea is, how can I just accelerate that afterwards and build a second app, a third app, without being afraid that I'm going to crash over the burden of all of the stuff that I put on myself to support it. And all I try to say here is that you don't have to. There are things that are not so typically advertised, but they are still there, and you can use them to ease that burden, support your growth with competence base.
Thank you, guys, back in the room. So thank you, guys, online for staying tuned with us. So this is the last session of today's event, where Amanda will introduce us to some examples that we use in practice in our day-to-day delivery to customers.
So the approach that we have is a little bit different. So we cannot build, for example, reusable elements or K2 packages that we can deploy, because all of our customers have different versions of K2. And but we wanted here to showcase some of the elements that we found interesting, because most of our customers face the same kind of issues when developing K2 applications. So I wanted to highlight how potentially you could approach that to have it consistent to all your applications, but ultimately not limiting any of the user requirements by doing that. So the first thing was, for us, the important part was the workflow. Whatever is built into the workflow is in the workflow, first of all. It depends on the version of the workflow, and we've all faced that when, okay, we've added something into the forms, we wanted to change something into the workflow as well as part of the business rule, so it's not, let's say, the second approver is after 10,000, now it's 10,000 plus another criteria or something like this, and you want to deploy that, and now it's based on the version of the workflow. So previous workflows will not benefit from the new user requirements. So the way we do things as part of the methodology here is to externalize most or all of the configuration outside of the workflow. The workflow here is just basically a representation of the flow that the business requirements want, the business wants, but that's it. Underneath, basically, nothing is in the workflow. Nothing, which means the task and notification destination, whether is user, AD groups, requester, or something, nothing is configured in the workflow as part of the development. Emails, notification, subject and content, you externalize as well, even if you can use references, even if you can use many things, we don't tend to do that. Decision rules as well, so all the points that you would have here, or the decision that will follow a different path. Also, you need to externalize that. And whatever you can externalize, then it's, I think, a good, it's a best practice to have. And whatever, then you can do it without being linked to a version. What it means behind, for example, we just did it in a, well, we just did it, for example, here in that particular example, we externalized everything into store procedure and configuration tables. So here, the first step that I do in my workflow is to set the folio. The folio doesn't come with something directly there. It comes from a store procedure that just has as an input the request ID. Maybe I can put even the workflow name and the activity name, and I can make it very generic because the store procedure that I'm using is aware of the context. So what is calling me is that specific process at that specific stage. So I could even have a folio that changes during the workflow stage. And then I update my request. Update my request, again, is not directly a smart object that is linked to a table. It's a smart object that is linked to a store procedure. That one knows exactly where I am. So I'm in that process. This is the process ID. This is all the elements that I need to use. And then the logic is outside of it. If the requirements changes, when, for example, the workflow starts, I need this and this and this also to happen in terms of data changes, then it's easy to do on the other side, easy to deploy, easy to get versions and everything, and it doesn't impact the way the workflow is done. In terms of configuration, so decision, for example, decision, we made here a decision to only have true or false as an outcome. So whenever we have a decision into the workflow, what we're going to say is we have, as part of the input elements, we have the request ID again, the context. Where are we, from where are we calling that decision? So that decision point is coming from this workflow, which is request validation, and this is during the step, and we even put it as a variable, the step name. So ultimately, if you needed to do another decision here, what you would have to do is copy paste that one, and then let's say, for example, this one will be there, and then from there I can put my decision again and rename, because it's based on the activity name here, request decision. And then that will take the logic from the new logic that is implemented in that stored procedure, for example. So we found that by doing this, basically, it made it easy for the maintenance support team to maintain any of the business changes when it comes to requirements, business requirements changing. Same again, well, I want another step, approval step. Okay, easy to do. You copy paste, you rename. This is the second validation. You change the flow where it should be. So here it should be after that one, etc., etc., and that's it. And there is nothing else to configure. Why? It's just because we have here before a task, we say, well, we want to do something before that task. So for example, we want to save somewhere that this task has been sent to 10 users or to 2 AD groups or something like this. And then we have the validation as well, which is configured, whether it's users or emails, everything is configured based on the workflow name and the activity name. And the all logic is outside. Users, same for all of them, we have that same implementation. So this task can be sent to requester, and requester we never use originator, because if there is a problem while you starting the request, then the requester will be the IT person who actually fixes the issue. The group, so users as well, and the group that have been configured. So for us, we have a generic table here with users or AD groups, and then from there, we would just have that same configuration everywhere, and we can just copy paste basically our element, and the all logic is outside. Same, we can even think of calling the set folio at every stage, and because it knows at which stage we add, then everything can be configured after. It might be the case where you just have one folio on the whole process, or it might be the case where you want to change something based on the data changes, etc. Especially when a requester change completely the request, then the department was in the folio or something like this, then it's updated straight away. So this is, for example, our approach that we are taking for the workflow side of things. So to make it, well, the less configuration in the workflow, and then and most of it to tables that you can put in the administration screen for the end users. So it's even the end users, key users, let's say, that will configure everything. Yeah.
So does it mean that from a skill set perspective, you will need an advanced level in SQL? Because when you say externalizing, I assume that is in the database.
Yes. Yes and no, because it's very standard and easy SQL knowledge. It's not like advanced, really advanced when it comes to the logic. But by doing it that way, we found out, for example, that we can cover all the business requirements. We weren't limited because there is nothing visual, there is nothing that brings limitation, but we found the consistent elements of the K2 application, and which is here, getting a decision at some point, getting emails, content and subject for notification or task notification, getting the folio, which is particular to K2, getting the task or even notification destination, and updating the request. So that was all the elements that we needed. So in terms of those stored procedures, they're all the time into our project. So why not creating a framework that is only those scripts plus, I don't know, an empty workflow that can be deployed, and then basically the developer will just copy paste that and rename the name of the activity, and that will be configured for him, basically. If we open, then when we do the troubleshooting and everything, if I open the decision point, for example, that will be, well, if my process step is decision, or if my workflow was named this one or something like this, then I do this one, and then it just give me true or false. If I don't want to go to that step anymore, I just remove that basically, and it will send false and false all the time to the workflow. And then basically, if there is for the support as well, or maintenance team, if they have a call from end users saying, well, I don't understand why you took that path. Well, paths are handled here to all of our applications. Whether you duplicate that store per business database, or whether you have it centralized somewhere, the logic remains the same. So you go there, and this is where all the decision points are done in a workflow. Well, I don't understand why it has been sent to that user or not that user or something like this. Well, you have all the users, notification, everything configured in your task destination, and task destination will be something like this. So this is the process name, process activity name, whether it's requester, user, or group, the name of the user and the other AD group, and that's it. If they want a new validation, that's fine. The change doesn't cost a lot. You go, you copy paste, you change the name of the activity, you come here and you add the task destination. Done. You can deploy, and this is, and that doesn't limit you in terms of business requirements. So it's something very basic that you can apply to your framework without having, and you can push it a little further, obviously, based on the consistency that you would have on your applications. So these are the common K2 elements that we've put here, but you can push it a little bit further if you want to. The other
Ask you was before you move on, was does that speak to anyone you've seen just now in terms of externalizing the configuration to make it a workflow?
It does. I think the key question that comes up in my mind is how do we handle for radically different versions of the workflow? So if you get to the position where you know, just well, I suppose a simple example would be additional decision paths on a decision. I could see how it would work for pre-deployment, and I can see how it would work after deployment. But if you've got an existing running workflow, how do you handle for those workflow instances that are still only expecting 2 paths out, but now they might get a path 3 out, and knowing between environments we're going to be using different version numbers potentially on the workflows themselves. We can't specify, you know, if you're on version workflow 15, then do this, and 16 do this. Make sense?
Yeah, we took that approach and tried to change completely the workflow to make it work in the new pattern. So this one pattern. So we kind of recreated the way the workflow was working using that framework. On the decision, then we would have some elements that needs to be basically using the legacy that you already have and the new elements. So for example, especially when you add a new outcome to an activity, for example, the view flow, the phone would have a new button, but the workflow, the old workflow wouldn't have that activity, but then the new one would have. So there is different ways of doing it. There is one way of saying that, okay, I want to show that button, and for every element you have a different workaround and say. So for example, for the buttons, you would say, well, that button, it will be displayed now for every user, but at the end of it, it will be if the workflow sends me an error, then I will treat that error in the backend and I would say, well, just put it in that task instead, or do something else because of that error that I can handle. Or you would say, well, if the request has been created before the day of the deployment, and then you will handle things like this.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the fears that I've got, because we've got some workflows that have run now for, comments on the weeks for us can take over 2 years sometimes. And that I know now that the workflow that I've got running today is so different to the one I had coming from when that was the first one was started, that to me it seems like a massive risk for myself that there's maybe just compliance checks or things like that aren't being done at the moment because the old process doesn't tell what to be done. And so I guess I'm conscious that integrating something like this immediately starts adding on, well, let's do an exception here, and then version 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they all have their own exceptions that come in.
Implementing that, you mean?
Well, yeah, sorry, from what I understood there, you said, if it's before this date, do this other thing. And I'm conscious that if it's before this date, do this thing. If it's before this date, and after this date, then do this thing, and then constantly building that out.
You could though use the management smart objects to create a version of this version as parameter to stop it.
But then between environments.
Between environments, I expect you to have different SQL databases. I don't expect you to have the same SQL database between different environments.
Yeah.
For every environment, you could have different SQL databases.
Right, I think that my question was surrounding the workflow load. So we will have potentially hundreds of versions of a workflow in development as we go through the design iterations, but then maybe 10 in production or something like that.
But the production server will have a different SQL database for it.
Okay, I think I'm not asking my question in the right way.
No, you would have the version that adds the new outcome is version 50 in there, but it's version 3 in prod.
Yes,
So
but in prod, your SQL database would be different than the SQL database in there. Yeah. Your SQL database in prod wouldn't know version 50.
Yeah.
Your SQL database in prod would know version 3.
Yeah.
So you could have
then we would rely on things like environment fields or something like that to say this behavior change happened from version 5 onwards or whatever. But it does still require some additional configuration in an environment by environment basis. But and I guess I just worry about that from a
So this is unlikely to happen with this kind of
the other thing,
framework.
because the other thing I just want to point out is that the amount of changes in the workflow, because you've now externalized the configuration, are going to be much less. So a change in the workflow would be a change of the process itself, no longer a change of I need to do.
My business logic.
Yes. So your operations are going to be managing a lot. Like it's probably going to manage. I mean, from a workflow that runs for years. The change now that's not based on configuration, like who approves it, but it's based on literally the process changing. It's going to be a more massive one.
Yeah.
So you're talking about transitioning from one process to a different process.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be like I open and save and deploy the workflow every time because I change the approver. It's going to be my onboarding process was A, and now my onboarding process is B. And just to add to what Amanda is saying, or what I like about this approach is one of the questions we always get about K2 is, do you have a decision rule engine? Right? I think that what AMO has built here is a decision rule engine for K2, because the more you go into complicated workflows, you don't want a workflow to define the decision. You want the workflow to react to a decision. So you probably externalize your decision making to a different system, and there are third-party systems. Yes, there are third-party systems out there that do only that. That gives you decision-making processes. So for me, what they have built is What they have built is exactly that. And because you have that, the amount of versioning that you're going to have in your workflows are going to be substantially less.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that you have development workflow level 3, you have production workflow 1, but that again is more around the governance of how do you deploy,
Yeah.
right? So maybe you have this as another store procedure that provides this parameter to the property management decision. You can what I really like about the approach is that you can actually start configuring this outside, increase the complexity on the development side of things, not on the workflow side of things.
To be honest, I've just thought for workaround and some of my
You could even put all that logic into a sub workflow, and then you call it how many times you want, and then your even your validation can become
I mean,
the configuration or something. But this is where you at some point you need to put the limits where okay, is everything sub workflow? It's not workflows only. It's everything is sub workflow, and then I just have my main one that is orchestrating sub workflows.
Yeah.
I still like to have personally the view flow for the end users. That is very powerful.
Yeah.
I think so. I prefer, even if I do that and copy paste it everywhere, I prefer to have everything into one workflow and not sub workflows, just to have the benefits of K2 sports and everything around it.
One of the things we have had to do is these long running workflows is just say we're not going to have long running workflows and make sure that we break them up into much more modular pieces that then execute whenever they need to execute a lot closer to the time where it's required. And that means we're always getting the most up-to-date one, and it just means part of our governance.
Yes.
We now have to deploy and know, okay, there's a dependency now being introduced by this new version of the tool or whatever, something like that. We're handling it that way, but yeah.
As part of the, just thinking of governance and performance as well. So as part of the way we build things as well, all the user tasks have timeouts as well. So whether it's validation, it goes back to the requester, whether it's requester at some point, it can be 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, but it just allows you to make sure that between the start and the end of your process, if the person left the company, then the process instance will still be running without anyone to actually end them or to be able to start. So those things as well make it easy for, and then you don't end up with a unused version, but still running instances because, well, everyone left, but they're here, so IT won't be able to make the decision to cut them or to stop them. Yeah, we've seen that workflows 5 years later still running where it shouldn't. So those elements just make it easy in terms of the implementation part of it, because you can see consistency between applications and you can push it the way you want and the way it works for your team in terms of skills or in terms of business as well. So here AD users and AD groups and users for this example.
Man, do you have any comment on what Rich just mentioned? Chat.
Very flexible implementation with it. In workflows, if you want steps, you can alter the scope without needing to restart a new workflow instance. Yeah, definitely. And that's the whole aim. It was to, because managing instances of workflows was not the strength of K2, then we left what is powerful in K2, which is orchestrating things, and we took that configuration outside of K2 to make it very flexible and to allow changes very easily. In terms of views and forms, how would you be able to translate that as well? The same way. So now that we have bound rules, now that we have a different approach in using views and forms, it won't be to have reusable elements. So it can be that, for example, for the view banner, you want that same banner that has the translation, that has the logo of the company, that has the application name. You make it very generic, and then every application has it. So that's is reusable elements. For view 1, 2, 3, they are linked to business data. So you can't have, or you don't want to have reusable elements, or if you do have like a duplicate or a template or something like this that you can deploy and using package and deployment, or even if you have SDK, generate them, that's part of it. And then how that is custom to your application, then we make it very custom. But the methodology that I think would be the more would bring the more benefits here would be to have in each, well, to have all those views independent. So they are working and they are self-sufficient, and you can just drag and drop and reuse it. And then you use functions of this view that you call in the form level, but you never create any rule on the form level that do business data interaction. So every single view would have, for example, on our side, a data validation and bound rule that you can call or not call, a save data rule that you call or not call, and you can bring it. And those rules will have, again, the context of the knowledge of the context. So which process activity I'm at. So even on and you'll have a generic comment and action view, for example, not based on any smart object. So this one can be reusable, yes or no, this can be discussed, but that will just start a workflow, send an action to the workflow and call these unbound rules. And those rules, you can even put the condition into those rules. So you wouldn't, on this part of the configuration, you don't really care if you need to save or not that view. You just put save 1, save 2, save 3, and that is your save form. On the save form, you can call it everywhere then. And then on this save 1, 2, 3, save 1 will save it all the time. Save 2 will only be saved at that stage and that stage of the workflow, because this is where it's actually editable. The other part, you don't want to save any changes on it. And then it's you get the best performance as well, because you're not calling anything that is not useful, but you get as well the most flexibility. So and as part of the support and maintenance, okay, there's something that is wrong, not saved correctly, then you can easily do testing on the forms level, on the views level, on the smart object level, and then you find the issues quite easily, and then you can fix it. And it's replicated everywhere straight away. Yeah, that was the elements, which is, it's a framework in terms of methodology and not really, well, elements that you can really use. Yeah.
Maybe it's about the consistency of the approach.
And the flexibility that it brings as well, without having to, to limit anything, basically, because we could build every app, but with the same logic all the time. And then it's the logic that you apply to the application.
One of the things that I find interesting with K2 is that it's great if you build something once, and it's great if you go and build something second time, third time. When it starts having all the issues, what you're addressing is when I want to do the same thing over and over again, and a bit more dynamically, right? And I think that's for me, that's the externalizing of configuration and reacting on the configuration, the awareness of the context. That solves a lot of those things. I would love if we had the ability to dynamically invoke a rule, for example. But I think this approach, for example, the example of save 1, save 2, save 3, it might not look elegant when you look at the form, but functionally wise, I think it makes a lot of sense. Having, let's say like you use low code to basically very fast do these things, program these rules, but it gets tedious to do the same rules all the time. then how do you, I mean, that simple thing you said, like, you need the view to be autonomous. Just does this. This is something for me, like, this is the fundamental best practice, and a lot of times myself got it wrong because the scenarios weren't applicable for that. But the moment you start realizing, okay, I can take the configuration of how those rules, when are those rules applied, when are those rules, so you get outside and have the context control what happens in my form. I think that adds to the reusability element. Yes, you might need to recreate the view, but you don't have, if you decide that your form needs to react in a different way, you don't have to go and change the same logic in 10 different forms. You change it in one place, the form reacts to that configuration, and it executes in exactly the same way that you do with workflows.
Power for me was to well, views are reusable in that sense in the project. And then we can build as many forms as we want based on who is connected, who is whatever, and then you make it very different in terms of the shape, in terms of everything you want. But the logic behind, as soon as you want to add a field or change something, it's done in 30 seconds, and then that is applied to all of your forms.
Also, the usability element of the views is not how do I do the same things in a view across 10 different smart objects. The usability concept of the view is if I have this particular smart object that I need to display in 5 different forms, how do I ensure that when someone looks at, I don't know, company information or attachment or comments, when they look at something, they know that they expect exactly the same behavior across 10 different, 20 different forms. That's the reusability. That's the power of reusability in K2. When we go down of, I don't want to create a view, I want to just have one generic view that's not K2. Like there are some things that I really say to customers, this is not what K2. If you want this, then you don't low code, honestly. If you want this level of dynamic reaction to the context, then you don't want low code. You need to go and code it, honestly. Like low code is about getting you the, like, I think that everyone who goes and starts working on a low code platform needs to pick a technology and do just a proper CRUT application on React or on C#, right? And then you realize these are the things that I'm winning, right? Obviously, always as a balance. You win some, you lose some. But I think the false notion of reusability when it comes to any low platform, we've seen it with WC as well, is when people say, yeah, but you know what? I've done this once. I don't want to do this again. Yeah, man, this is low code. We allow you to do it really fast. But we can't go with I mean, if you think about it, the idea of low code is I build a smart object, I generate a view on top of it, and I can reuse that view across my forms. It's not about I need to make something that will do the same thing for every smart object I have. This is not what low code is about. So I think that externalizing configuration and this kind of rule engine is something that K2 has suffered for a long time. We don't intend to do anything on that front, I'll tell you now. There's no planning for us to build a rule engine. I don't know if we're going to acquire a company that does decision rules, but there's nothing in K2 that is going to fix it. So I think that I really like the AMO approach. But we have debates, philosophical debates over this in the last couple of days, and we're going to continue to have as we share experiences and we discuss. But in essence, since we're discussing about frameworks, any framework needs to have. I talked about consistency in design, and I think that Amanda is talking about consistency in logic. And I think that these needs to be seriously taken into consideration when you build a K2 application for exactly the reasons you highlighted. Like, why do you end up with a workflow that has 15 versions? Because certainly your process hasn't changed 50 times over the last year, not to that extent. Like, it's like changing who approves something is not a change in the process. Changing whether something needs to go to a higher level of approval, it's not that big of a change in the process. It's just a configuration of how the escalation works. You understand what I'm saying? The change of how the escalation works in your organization doesn't change the fact that someone submits an expense request, someone needs to approve it. The way how the escalation works is irrelevant to the process. So all of those things, when we start putting them outside, store procedures are a great way. We had a discussion about APIs and REST and store procedures, but that's trivial. That's a philosophical question. I think that the SQL space is a space that everyone who's in K2 is very comfortable with. These are skills that already exist to people who have K2 knowledge, and I think that externalizing configuration and how forms work and workflow works is the only way for anything to grow and scale.
And what we wanted to avoid as well by implementing it that way is try to make sure that it's not heavy in terms of the deployment when it comes to deploying an application. And we don't want to restart the K2 service because if there's 20 applications, then so you want to avoid certain things as part of the deployment, and it's all the time the same thing. And by doing it like this, the advantage is you can kind of implement now new features that are consistent to your application that helps you in terms of testing, maintenance, and things like this. Like, for example, here, the get task destination, because every task or every notification goes through that store procedure all the time. So it gets just the users, the groups, and then put it into that notification on that task. Now here, as part of our development methodology, we put a process settings table, and every time we check that send all to requester, it bypasses completely the whole configuration table and just send everything to the requester. And it's hard for the business team to put everyone around the table and test their workflow. So as part of the being able to help the end users is like, okay, well, actually, I'm just going to go to the administration, check that checkbox. Now everything is sent to you. In the reality, you will not have that scenario, but it helps you to test your specific tasks. So, and then the person can do the test by herself on her side. So you can also build things as part of your framework that makes life easy for testers or for maintaining the application and security as well. So once the configuration is done, you don't want that whatever email you put in the request form, for example, to actually send the email, it comes from dev, it's always send all to requester. That's it. So you can put something like this. Another feature as well is if you have, for example, here something that, or a view or something that manage the user accesses, what we find very interesting and very useful as well as part of the application development is to develop a block access feature. So you have a small message that IT can, or anyone can put, even the business users, and you put block access to everyone, and then basically everyone will be redirected immediately to that maintenance form that allows you to do a deployment on SharePoint or whatever the part that K2 is using without having to block anything, without having to send communication to end users, and then everyone now and then can try to wants to access it even if you said no, or having to I don't know, manage the rights differently. And by giving that power as well to the end users, you make sure that they have control of what is going to be communicated to the whole team. And also so they have always with that feature, for example, we have a list of people who can access the application, even if it's in maintenance. And we just put the key users for them to, okay, oh yeah, I checked the new feature is there and it's working. Now I can allow my team to access to it. So by having those kind of elements that are centralized and are managing, I don't know, all users or all emails or all decisions, then you can apply something on top that helps in sort of maintenance as well. Yes.
Yeah, so I think we've covered all of the things that we wanted to share with you today as part of this first iteration of what we hope will be something that we can repeat in the future with you here, obviously in person, and all of the guys that followed us online. And as part of this initiative, what we really wanted to try and start again, because it did exist in the past, is the community. We're really proud and obviously really keen to showcase what we do and stuff, but most of it is sharing it with the people that use this technology, and it's just about helping each other and making sure that we can leverage the great tech, making more beautiful things with it. I was saying right at the beginning, it's the bigger, faster, better, all those kind of things. So we certainly welcome any feedback about this event, specifically about the topics that we have discussed. And I guess we will round up with everyone individually after the event as well. And if there's anything that you feel is important to you that we've not discussed today, please let us know so that we put into the subject of things to tackle next time we organise such a session. And finally, obviously, if you found any of that stuff interesting, just contact us, whether it be Nintex or us at AMO. And what we can do is have a chat with you, understand your context. Clearly, everything we've said today is all about the context into which you apply that tech into your business, and we'd be really glad to help you take some of those snippets that we showcased today and implement them for you, or with you. So once again, thank you very much for participating. Yeah, and I don't know whether there's any questions, any feedback.
Any comments from anyone online? I think we've had a few through before, but if anybody wants to unmute and just share anything that you've taken from the event or feel that you resonated with, just feel free to. Generally, there is a level of satisfaction.
Every question has satisfaction, everything has been answered, or we're just getting late. But in any case, these are the contact details of all of them. Because today, this has been recorded as well. So we'll make sure you get the link to the recording. Because even if it was a bit lengthy, then you can go straight to the bits that you're interested in. Thanks a lot, guys, obviously for your presence, your remote presence as well online. It's very much appreciated, and we'll contact all of you again individually.
Yeah.
I'm not yet anything solved.
Sorry, well, I got ahead of myself. We didn't discuss salary yet. Right. So this is the last slide. Everything was good.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Elgi. Thanks a lot, Jan. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, thanks for participating. And yeah, we'll circulate everything. Cheers, everyone. Goodbye. Fantastic.